This is Pheng with Southeast Asian Action, and we are a national C4 organization, and I'm so happy to be joined by Mai Chao, who's an attorney in the state of Wisconsin. And she and I will be talking about the Supreme Court race that's coming up here on April 1st and why it matters to us in the Hmong community. So Mai Chao, you want to give a little brief introduction about yourself and who you are?
Hi, thank you for having me. I am Mai Chao Chang. I am an attorney here in the state of Wisconsin, and I've been practicing for about 7 years. And I primarily split my practice between family law and business immigration. But I also, or earlier on in my career, I also was a civil litigator where I handled cases between doing personal injury to consumer protection to also doing a lot of other smaller different types of cases that gave me the opportunity to really go into court in both small claims, trial courts, district courts, and then although I haven't practiced in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I've had to work on some cases with some partners that had argued in front of the Supreme Court. So very excited to be here and looking forward to having a good conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We're actually really proud and excited to have you here. And you're exactly the right person that we should be asking these questions of and to, so that we can actually make sure that the people in our community really understand why this race actually matters so much. And in addition to that, why local races actually matter and how they impact our lives, right? Particularly, a lot of people don't actually pay attention to the Supreme Court because they don't know what the courts really do and what the court's functions really are. So if you can just share with us a little bit about what is the function of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court and what does it do?
Yeah, great questions. So I think I'll start out by kind of explaining more generally how the state court system works overall. In Wisconsin, there are basically 3 tiers of courts, right? 3 levels. And the first level is the trial court level. We also call it a circuit court. And that's what most people, I think, might be familiar with in terms of what you see on Law and Order, what you see on Suits, right? Is people going into a courtroom and there's witnesses on the stand, there might be a jury, and then there's a judge. So that is the trial court level. Those are the first judges that you see as a trial court judge. Once a decision is issued by a trial court judge, then for parties that are not happy with that decision, or for parties that think that there was a mistake in the judge's decision-making process, what they can do is they can appeal to the Court of Appeals. So now this is like the second level. And at the Court of Appeals, that type of litigating is done mostly in writing. So you, both sides would write pretty lengthy papers or essays. We call them briefs. And in those briefs, you would set forth your facts with the issues to be decided, and then the law, and then the arguments. And sometimes the Court of Appeals might ask for the attorneys drafting these arguments to also come and argue. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the Court of Appeals decides these on the written submissions. Once the Court of Appeals has decided at that level, you're pretty much done. Unless you think, no, this is still absolutely incorrect, or there is something else that the Court of Appeals has incorrectly decided, then the party who is still unhappy might have a chance to then appeal that or petition the Supreme Court to review that decision. Now, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the state, and they have authority to hear a lot of different types of cases. Now, not everyone has a right to have their case to be heard by the Supreme Court just because they want to. It's really through a petition for review outlining what the issues are and why it's important for the Supreme Court to rule on these cases. So the Supreme Court is comprised of 7 justices, and these are attorneys who are either elected or appointed by the governor to fill a seat. Each justice serves a term of 10 years, And after 10 years, they have to either be reelected or they can vacate the seat and someone else can run or be appointed to serve as a justice. And in any 1 year, only one justice can be appointed or elected into a seat. And so this year is very important because we have an election coming up on April 1st. And so instead of the governor appointing someone to fill this role, there are two candidates that are then running for the seat. And the Supreme Court also gets the last word frequently on a lot of different issues. And so these critical issues are those that impact consumers, right? Issues impacting reproductive health, the quality of your schools, to how much money you can get if you get injured in a car accident, right? They can also set caps on that as well. So, the Supreme Court has a very important say in a lot of things that impact your daily life.
Thank you. That's quite a lengthy process to get there. And I hope that folks can really understand like the process and how much it takes to actually get to the Supreme Court. Now, could you share with us a little bit more specifically? Can you actually talk about some specific issues that may come about for the Supreme Court to actually decide in the next coming years that would specifically impact us in the Hmong community?
So for anyone who's ever interested in what cases the Supreme Court is hearing, the Supreme Court does put out an oral argument schedule, and it's open to the public. Anyone can go and listen to it. And it's also, at least from what I recall, it was available online. And so anyone can tune in and listen to these oral arguments. So if you're ever interested in what's going on in the Supreme Court, there's a schedule that's put out. There's a website that you can go and listen to it live. And the briefs, the written arguments that the attorneys submit, those are also available publicly and free for anyone to review. They're usually pretty boring and anywhere between 50 to 100 pages long, but certainly there is a certain level of accessibility, at least in terms of getting information about what cases are available or are being heard. Now, with respect to this coming year, there is a very important case that involves reproductive rights. In fact, it involves the interpretation of a statute in the state of Wisconsin. So right now there is a statute in Wisconsin. This is 940.04. This is the abortion statute, right? And basically any person other than the mother who intentionally destroys the life of an unborn child is guilty of a Class H felony. And then there's also, more language in the statute about any person who intentionally destroys the life of an unborn child or causes the death of the mother by an act with the intent to destroy the life of an unborn child. So this is now starting to sound like a doctor who may assist in an abortion. They might be subject to basically a felony charge. And so there is a current case right now that is before the Supreme Court that would likely be heard in the next session. And the Supreme Court will, with this new justice, will be deciding on the constitutionality of this law. So this is a very important case, and it's going to really set the tone for reproductive rights and healthcare rights, really, of a lot of people who can give birth in this state.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that is very important. I think what we've known and heard from in the community and across the country from Hmong folks as we did focus groups last year was that reproductive right was a really important issue that people actually cared about and people were actually wanting to make sure that they had access to, right? And that it was something that they wanted to make sure that whoever was running for president at that time was going to grant that and keep that access alive and well for people. And I think similarly, we have to understand that it sounds like what you're sharing too, Mai Chao, is that the state of Wisconsin, particularly the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, can actually really decide whether Wisconsin allows it or not allow for reproductive rights to actually and justice to actually happen or not, right? Essentially, in more layman's term, whether abortion can be done or not done, and at what, how many weeks. in terms of what you just shared there with us. So that is really important for those of us who actually care about reproductive justice and access to our own bodies and the choices that women can make within their own bodies. That is really important as well too. And so I hope that any of you who are listening or watching this really can understand the impact of what the Supreme Court can actually do in the state of Wisconsin. So it's not just actually the state legislature that just passes laws and make laws, but the Supreme Court, to what you're sharing and have been sharing, is that they interpret the law. And they're the ones who say this is actually what the law says. And so therefore that is actually what the law is. And so everybody then now has to actually follow that. Am I correct about that?
Yes, yes, you are correct about that. In fact, I think this ties into the notion that the Supreme Court serves as really a check on the government, right? So the state government there are three branches, right? There's the executive branch, and that is the governor. There is the legislative branch, and that consists of our state senators and our assembly, right, our representatives. And then there's also the Supreme Court. And you're absolutely correct that the decisions that the Supreme Court makes does impact how lower courts then can interpret these similar issues that come up. So decisions that the Supreme Court makes has precedential impact. And precedential basically means that it can become a law that the trial courts and the Court of Appeals would follow. So it's important. It's important because they have the final say, and they also enact laws based on their decisions.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And so with the Supreme Court race that is coming up, Mai Chao, we know that there's two candidates, and one is Judge Crawford, Susan Crawford, and the other is Judge Brad Schimmel. And they obviously appear to have very different ideology and very different approaches to being judges and to how they view cases that come about from them. Why do you think it's important for people to understand a judge's ideology and how they may approach certain cases?
I think of it as judicial ideologies guide justices, how to interpret the cases in front of them. Now, judges and justices, they are allowed to use their common sense. They are allowed to use their lived experiences. And of course, they have to be objective. But I think, as we all know, we all have very unique lived experiences. We all have different beliefs on certain issues. It's important to hear how they talk about certain issues that impact your everyday life. Because again, everyone says the same thing, right? All judges are like, of course, I'm going to apply the facts to law and be impartial, right? But not be biased. But it's clear that if you as anyone, if you already have certain values and thoughts, you're going to lean on your values when you interpret the law in a certain way. And so I think it's important to listen to the candidates as they explain how they think about certain issues, because that would likely that kind of gives you a viewpoint into how they're going to maybe interpret a case that comes before them that deals with that kind of issue.
I think what you just shared there, Mai Chao, is really important, is that the fact that we believe to the notion that justice should be blind, it's really important to also understand at the end of the day that these are people. And people undoubtedly have values, and they have different perspectives on life. And as much as we would want judges to be impartial and objective, oftentimes they may not be, because they are going to judge cases and decide cases based on those values. I'm sharing this in a way for everybody so that we can really understand how important it is to actually really research the candidates who are actually running for the Supreme Court on April 1st here, Judge Crawford and Judge Schimmel, and really understand where they stand on certain issues, or what their perspective and what their values are, because they may potentially, and most likely, and in some instances, will be using their own values to actually apply and base their decisions off of to that of the law, even though they're not supposed to. But we can't help that because that's part of who we are as humans in the society. And I think that that's perhaps the paradox in the judicial system in some ways, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such a unique election for such a unique judicial election this year because I think these are very different times. These are, and I say that because it's common for judges to have donors donate to their campaign, right? However, this is a very interesting year and very, I think, different from what other campaigns have seen before, where this is a campaign. Well, these two campaigns are those that are backed by kind of more national groups. Now, it's not to say that determines kind of what leanings they are, but I think this is a year where I think as voters, we should be cognizant. We should be aware of who is donating to these candidates. And if you don't know enough about these candidates, look at who is supporting them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think doing research before you go and vote is really important. And I think that that's partially why we're having this conversation around the Supreme Court and the candidates as well, so that people really understand. So people should go and do their research and really go out and vote. I think one of the things before we sort of end the conversation is, what would you say to people who actually don't think that they should vote in this race at this moment?
Yeah, I think I would say that your vote is absolutely so important. And I would encourage you, right, to really think about what's important to you, right, and what you care about. Or if not yourself, think about the people around you. Think about your siblings or your family, your grandparents. Think about your children and their teachers and their healthcare, your healthcare, right? I think maybe it's a privilege to feel like elections don't impact you, but they certainly do, because you live in a society that is governed by rules and laws, and I, as an attorney, I'm the one that gets to go and argue those rules and laws based on what has happened to you, right? Or based on what you want done. And so I get to work within that environment. But my clients are you, right? My clients are people, businesses. And so voting in elections, not just elections, but really in local elections where you vote for city council, you vote for other positions, definitely impacts you. And if not you, it's going to impact you one way or another through your kids, through your grandparents, your parents, through their work, your work, right? And so I think it is absolutely important. It does impact you. I get this question. So being a family lawyer, I'm going to give an example. Being a family lawyer, lots of people come to me with questions about divorces. And, they ask me about child support, of like, if I lose my job, do I still have to pay child support? Right. And the answer is, yeah, child support will still continue, except if you want it to pause, you might have to file a motion, go into court. And they'll ask me, well, why? I don't have a job. Why would I have to file a motion? And my answer is usually because that's what the law says, right? The law, there is a law that there's a law that sets out how child support should be paid, how it's calculated, who gets to pay child support. And my response to usually most of them are my friends and family is, if you don't like it, you should change the law. And it's funny because they think, well, how do I change the law? and well, you change the law by you can vote because judges interpret the law. You vote for your legislators because they're the ones who also create the law. And you also vote for, your governor, your other people in office, because they somehow impact the rules that really impact your life. So I think until it's interesting because I think when I have these conversations with people, again, more so for me in my line of work around divorce, that's when I think it becomes, I think people can relate to it more, or maybe it becomes more, maybe more real to some people, right? So I really do encourage individuals, no matter how old you are, to really think about what you care about and think about who's in charge of making the rules that impact what you care about. And know that when you vote in a judicial election, maybe it's your relative one day or your neighbor that might have a case that will show up in front of the Supreme Court. And hopefully, whoever is listening to these cases have the right ideologies to rule in a way that will be fair and to your friends or family or relatives.
Right. Yeah, I think what you shared there, the last piece there, is so critically important for people to really understand is sometimes we don't like the outcomes, right? And or the decisions of what perhaps even law enforcement officers do, right? Or we don't like that we're paying taxes too much, or we don't like why is it that I can't park my car right in front of my house in the street, right? Or why can't I put out the garbage on a certain day? Or why can't I put out the couch on the street so that the garbage truck can come pick it up? All of those things are dictated by local government. And so if we don't, to your point, participate in local elections, then we're saying it's okay for them to say we don't do those things, right? And the other part of it to what you're sharing there is that if we don't show up, then it means what? It means that other people who actually show up are going to be the ones who are deciding on our behalf. They vote, so they're going to decide on our behalf. They vote, they're going to hold these people who they vote accountable, and they get to actually say, I voted for you, and so therefore you should be doing these things, right? So they're going to advocate for the kind of city, the kind of county, the kind of lifestyle they want, quote unquote. And if we don't vote, we don't get to say, this is what I want to see happen. This is what I want to see be shaped or created for me or my community or my family in the instance that you're talking about in terms of divorces, right? And the Supreme Court plays a huge role in that. And so I hope that people really take this in and really understand the importance and how crucial and critical this race that's coming up in 2 weeks is, and really get out and vote and really understand that Judge Schimmel and Judge Crawford are really important at this moment, and for you to do your homework on them and for you to really understand when you are at the polls on April 1st or before that, because some localities are voting early already next week, that you're not just checking off somebody's name just because you saw their name or just because somebody told you, but you're really well informed about why you're actually choosing that person. Right. So thank you, Mai Chao, for being with us and sharing all your thoughts and insights. And as a practicing attorney, I think your insight is definitely invaluable and really helpful in us understanding more about the Supreme Court and why it matters to us in the Hmong community. And we really hope that people in the community really get out and vote on April 1st.
Yeah, thank you for having me.